Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Jason Dixon, our training coordinator, will be conducting this webinar about the Spatial Editor and about the new tips and tricks that we have developed for the latest version. We'll get back at the end of the session to see if you have any questions, so please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, and I will address them at the end of the webinar. So, Jason, feel free to start.
Thanks, Emilio. So today I'm going to run through the Spatial Editor. My name is Jason, I'm the training coordinator here at Petrosys, and I'll go through a few of the new features that we've added in, which were popular requests by our clients and were made available in Petrosys PRO 29.3. So this is the last webinar in this series of webinars. So we've had a few about the introduction of Petrosys 2019.3 and a few of the other features such as the LS Paleo scan connectors, T-Navigator and the fault stick displays. And now we'll run through some tips and tricks in the Spatial Editor. So the agenda, we'll run through a bit of an introduction now, and we'll run through some Spatial Editor line segments and how we can work with those, fixed line length and fixed line angles, and how we can also add multiple lines in parallel and also in rays. I'll run through a demonstration and then a summary at the end. So line segments. Lines that we display in the Spatial Editor or create in the Spatial Editor can now be split into different segments. So under the general Draw a Line tool, we have a new icon, not new icon, a new option that we can split new shapes into line segments. And each time we make a click with the mouse, that line is then split into a segment. And that can have its own attributes assigned to each of those individual segments. We can split existing lines into segments, and we can also group existing segments back into a single line. We can also generate lines of fixed length and fixed angles, so we can draw them on the map. So we have a new icon for this feature, which is the one with the little line in front of it, with a pencil, and we can specify the length and the angle that we want to draw that on the map. And then we can interactively place those lines on the map. And again, we can display those in groups and group them together, and they all share attributes, or we can have them individually with their own attributes tied to each of those lines. For multiple lines, we can display them. So with a straight line, if we decide to display two lines, we can select to display two lines and the gap between those lines, and they'll display in array. So one line in front of the next line, and we can also display them in parallel, and that will be lines next to each line. We can still specify the length, the angle, and the gap between rays and parallel lines. So it's a quick and easy way to plan out multiple lateral well paths from a single drill pad. And again, attributes can be added to each of those lines, and we can combine them together to groups as well. We can also apply buffers to these, so we can identify drainage areas around each of those potential segments and then design our well plans around those. Once we've got those how we're happy with them, we can then export those. So we can use a spatial data translator to export those lines which we've generated in either a Shape, Excel, GeoDataBase, and any of the files that we can generate in the Spatial Editor. We can push them out into other file types or into other programs such as Doug Patrol, OpenWorks, Kingdom, or ZMAP. So now I'll run through a quick demonstration. So here we have our two fields. I'll just turn off the grid so that you can see the fields. We've got the northern field and the southern field identified between some fault blocks. So to start the Spatial Editor, it's Edit Spatial Editor, and that will open up this new panel here. This icon here turns on our attributes and spatial data panel. So when we create spatial data, we can see information about that selection over here. And I'm going to create a new file. We can create those temporary in memory or full definition files. For this instance, I'll create a full definition, a shape file. We'll do a proposed well plan. We'll do it as a projected so we can select how we want this to be. We need this to be aligned if we're going to use these features, and we can also add our own attributes here, so we can add attributes we can subtract attributes. So I'll add well name, I'll add a new one, call that attribute formation, and that will need to be text, and we can add depth and so forth here as well. So click OK to that and OK again, and now we have our new shapefile ready to be edited. So to start with, I'll draw a single line, and I'm going to split this line into new line segments. So we may have a proposed line or well that we want to drill through here. Each time I make a click with the mouse, you see that we've now have 3 segments generated from that line. So whenever I select one of these segments, you'll see that over here, each of those segments is selected. And we have the well name and formation here, so we can type in A, B, and C, and give those a well name. And we can also type in the formations that they're intersecting here as well. Should I want to group these back into one, I can highlight that line, right click, group, and you'll now see that they have all been combined into one. I can then also highlight that, right click, and split into line segments, and that should split those up into line segments as well, which for some reason is not working at the moment. We'll draw a new line and right click, join selected line segments, and then we can right click and split into line segments, and it splits them out again. And we can highlight those, press delete, and remove those lines as well. If we want to do multiple wells from a well pad, we use this icon, or if we want to do parallel or ray lines, we can set those up here. So we can turn those on and off. We can set the length, so we can set 3,000 meters, the angle that we want to do that, so we can do that at 45, and you can see we've got a 45-degree angle, 2 lines spaced at 1,000 meters apart. But we want to set up to drill some lines in a well pad that roughly match our direction of our field, so we can set those up at 105. We want to do some parallel lines, so do 4 parallel lines, and we'll do a gap of 600 meters between each. Actually, make that a little bit wider. Let's go 800 meters between each parallel line, and then when I draw onto the map, you can see now that I can draw well plans from a pad, and we can display how we can generate a well plan, which we can then send to our drilling team for cost estimates. We've got a gap over here, so this is going to be useful. We will put one there like that, and then a right click to exit that. So then you can see now that I've got all of these lines, and I've got well names, information, attributes. Should I wish to add some more attributes, I'll right click in this box, modify attribute definition, and I can then add some other attributes. So this one I'm going to add will be proposed depth, and that will be an integer. And I click OK, and now I have proposed depth here, so I can select one of these lines and type in a proposed depth for that line. You can see here that these lines have gone outside of our field, and that's not going to be useful for us, so we can then remove those wells. We can drag a box around those, highlight all 4 of those lines, go into operations, and then we can polygon clip, and we can clip outside or inside, arrays outside, arrays inside. So we'll clip outside of the polygon, we'll select from a file, or we can draw a hand-picked polygon as well. And here there's already selected the polygon that's being displayed and the northern field. So if I click OK to that and click perform clipping and then close that, you can see now that those lines that were outside of our polygon have been clipped. But if we zoom in on this area, we don't want to go right up to the field boundary because that's going to be close to the water's edge. So we can highlight these lines here and use the arrays tool, and we can use the shift and the mouse scroll wheel to make this wheel larger or smaller, which is our editing circle, and then I can edit those lines accordingly. So now we have our field development plan, and we may want to buffer those to see the drainage. So I just draw a box that covers all of those lines. I'll just go back to the pointer, draw a box which covers all of the lines, and then operations, buffer shapes, and I can draw a buffer around each of those. So we did them at 800 meters apart. So we can see our drainage around those wells will be 400 meters, and we can apply that. And then you can see that we've buffered those shapes. If I want to save those, I can, when we close out of this, we can have the option to save our buffered shapes, and we can also copy those into a new files as well. So here we have our buffered area. We can see we've got some gaps. We may need to go back and edit our well plan. So I'll just turn those buffers off, and we've got our proposed well plan here. We can save that, and then I'll close out of the Spatial Editor, and we can go back into display a GIS file, and we can select our proposed well plan, and we'll make those nice and fat and stand out. So now we can display our proposed wells on our map and display our grid underneath of it. We can see where we're going to be drilling, and then we can take that proposed well plan, export that to other programs if we need be, or send that to our engineers for proposed economics and costings. I'll go back now to the PowerPoint and we'll run through some final thoughts. So new line segment features allow for quick and easy segmentation of lines, so we can quickly generate those lines on our map, and we can set those to fixed length and angles as well. The lines can have multiple parallel and ray extensions, and we can also add attributes to each of those for naming and identification purposes. And we can also group them together where they share the attributes, or they can also be individual specific lines with their own specific attributes. And we can export those into third-party applications using the Spatial Data Translator. We do have a separate webinars and videos on how to use the Spatial Data Translator. So thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, we'll answer those shortly. And please remember that you can log into the Petrosys portal and go to the Learn tab and find a whole heap of our different how-to videos and PDFs listed under there, which you'll be able to search on and find information to help you with your workflows.